All right, you guys, here's your next Q&A. And like I always say, if I didn't get you on this one, I'll get you on the next one. Let's get straight to it. So Jesse McDad wants to know, did the feds ever find out who Don Julio was or catch up to him? The feds and the DEA already had an active investigation open on Don Julio when I got arrested in 2004. But they couldn't move on him because he was too slippery and no one gave him up. His name was mentioned many times during all the indictments, but nothing was ever given to them that would have helped them build a case on him. As I said before, later I would end up finding out that Julio had close ties to the Gulf cartel. I had a lot of love and respect for the dude because he looked out for me and was always straight up with me, but to this day, he's still out there doing his thing. So the critic wants to know, if you were allowed to change one thing in the NF Constitution, what would it be? I'd implement a clause that would make it optional to function within the organization for as long as you wanted to live that lifestyle, and that you'd be allowed to go on in life when you got to a point to where you just wanted to settle down and be a family man. If you think about it, this would also benefit the organization, as it would curtail a lot of those who ultimately decide to cooperate just based on the fact that they're fearful of the repercussions that come with dropping out. Right now, in one of the books I'm reading, Blood in the Fields, is a prime example of what I'm talking about. Joseph Mojo Ibarra from Salinas turned federal informant and took down the whole Salinas regiment just because he was afraid of the consequences he would face from dropping out. If these types of senseless policies weren't in effect, guys like Mojo wouldn't have flipped. The same could be said for Robert Brown Bob Viramontes. Here's a general, someone at the top of the apex, someone at the very top of the organization, who reaches a point in life where he realizes that there's more to this world than the NF. He decides he wants to become a father to his kids, a husband to his wife, and that he's just tired of being involved in all the cutthroat politics. Why not just let someone like him phase on out and go on with his life? It creates more problems for the NF than it does good. Would you want people functioning beside you out of obligation and out of the fear of reprisal? Or would you rather have guys function beside you because that fire is burning and because this is what they truly want? That's a no-brainer. Think about the pros and cons. Anyone who can put this in perspective should be able to surmise that the pros clearly outweigh the cons. This clause would articulate an exit strategy that wouldn't place the organization's security in jeopardy, but at the same time, it wouldn't force those members who just reach a point to where they just want to live their lives raising their kids and devoting more of their time to their families. Why not allow them to go on with their lives? Why not allow them this option, especially if they've contributed multiple years of loyal service and they ain't hurting the organization by just taking their lives in another direction? I'm not trying to help develop ways that would improve the NF, but this one is a win-win across the board. Again, living by and enforcing that blood in, blood out philosophy is that you force members who no longer have the desire to continue functioning, and this is out of obligation under the threat of death. If they didn't feel trapped, obligated for life, and they were given the option to hang up the gloves when they felt like they put in enough years for the organization, then there would probably be a lot less indictments, a lot less members who are willing to cooperate, and a lot less detraction amongst the members who just want to go on in life and be family men. So Boss Player wants to know, what were some of the gangs around when you were running in Mission Streets? Some of the gangs that were around back then were the following. Of course, my hood, SFM. Then you had LTM, LNS, Hampshire, 22nd Street Hogs, Natoma Street Boys, Bryant Street, 30th, Cortland, Persida Park, C Street, Southeast, Excelsior Park. I know there's a lot more that I'm forgetting, but at the time, these were the ones that were more active out there. So Victor Hugo wants to know, after hearing your book, I was surprised in how being in prison never seemed to bother you. Why? That's a good question, but I think for me, prison was just part of growing up. It was a part of the lifestyle. I settled into that environment and adapted really fast. And the crazy part about it, in retrospect, when I look back on it, is that prison was a lot different than it is today. It was nothing like it is now. But again, I don't think it ever bothered me because it just seemed like it was a normal part of life to me. It was part of that lifestyle I was living, and I didn't care. I wouldn't say that going to the joint was ever a goal of mine and that I ever felt like I was accomplishing something by getting there. But then again, I guess getting that prison cred under my belt was something I knew I needed. So Ben Quayen wants to know, do you know of any people within the organization who may have sought the protection allegiance of Señor La Muerte or any other spiritual saint of criminals? I only know one individual who sought spiritual guidance from the saint of criminals and other superstitious beliefs. Paul Spooquillo Salcido from Salinas. I want to say his mom was into brown magic or the saint of criminals, but I can't be sure. What I do know is this. When Spooquillo was fighting the murder he caught and was at an impasse on whether he should take a deal or go to trial, he sought spiritual guidance from a psychic who was into reading tarot cards. Spooquillo apparently told his girl to go get spiritual guidance from this psychic and to ask her if he should take the deal or go to trial. He basically opted to put his entire future in his hands and trust that she was going to give him an accurate reading. Everyone thought he was crazy and tried advising him against it, but he was already sold on this whole superstitious thing and was dead set on putting all his confidence in this. So his girl, who thought he had completely lost his mind and who was completely against this herself, went to this psychic and got the reading. The psychic basically told him that he was going to prevail in trial, not to take the deal, and that good things were in store for him. Desperate and hopeful that this psychic was legit, he took his case to trial and got hammered. He was found guilty of all charges and was given a life sentence. Spooquillo was a solid dude with aspirations to become a C, and he had quickly built up a reputation for being a hitter who was eager to earn his bones. But unfortunately for him, he rolled the dice and lost. So the Martin 400 wants to know, can you explain the concept of the 50-50 yards? I've heard it explained somewhat, but not sure if I fully understood it or if it was just explained correctly. Are dropouts that do not join dropout gangs allowed to do their time alone, or are they seen as a threat and removed by the dropout gangs? I just played a phone call for you guys, and I know in my answer right here, I talk about playing the phone call. I already did, so just disregard. But I'm going to read my answer anyway. The concept of a 50-50 yard. What it is a yard that is composed of dropouts and others who are classified as being active. That's basically what it is. It's basically a yard designed for people that want to go home. CDCR is well aware of prison politics and some of the protocols that active gang members have to follow. Their concept is, we're going to put you out on the yard with dropouts, chomos, baby killers, and weirdos. If you want to get time cut off your sentence and go home early, then you'll program and disregard the protocols that you're bound to follow as an active gang member. If you refuse and disregard those protocols and you can't program, then go out there and do what you got to do. And this is basically the merging of GP and SNY yards. Believe it or not, a lot of the guys that go to these 50-50 yards know ahead of time what they're walking into. And although they tell the fellas that they're going to go over there and get paid, most of the time they end up staying. Some have been getting off, and I'm going to have Justin Trigger Wallace from San Jose, 12th Street, describe what happened in the phone call about a week ago when actives were brought to his yard. As far as the second part of your question in regards to whether or not dropouts are allowed to do their time alone on SNY yards, or if they're looked at as a threat and removed by dropout gangs, I've never been to an SNY, but from everyone that I've talked to that's been on one, they've all told me that SNYs are worse than GP yards. Here's why. Dropouts and dropout gangs operate different than active gangs. They're loose cannons, and they're not bound to the type of discipline, protocols, and policies that active gangs are. Therefore, they do what they want. Order is something that's not recognized out there. One thing's for sure, you're more prone and more susceptible to being victimized on an SNY yard than you are on a GP. I've heard that there's been guys on SNYs that have requested to go back to a GP yard because it was so bad out there. But to answer your question directly, if you're a strong-minded, strong-willed dude, you're going to be all right. If you carry yourself like you're weak and like you're not a strong-minded individual, then they'll sense and detect this and they'll try you. My advice to anyone going out to an SNY would be to mind your own business and to not allow yourself to be manipulated into joining one of those dropout gangs. My real advice would be to just get off and not program with chomos, because that's what I do. But to each his own. I personally would rather do my time in the shoe than to be out there on one of those yards. But everybody's different. You got to do what's best for you. So Brandon Mullins wants to know, I listened to Powder in one of his stories. He says that the blacks knew ahead of time about the hit on Yogi, and they let it go because they knew it had to happen. Shit. You think that's the truth? I guess it had to be somewhat, or a riot would have kicked off, right? I don't believe that at all. I don't know Powder, and I'm not calling him a liar. However, if that's his truth, then I just think that maybe some of the information got misconstrued. This is what you need to understand. This end of hostilities agreement that was agreed to by the Big Four, NF, MA, BGF, and the ABs, was an agreement with no conditions and no preconceived exceptions. It was supposed to be binding across the board, meaning any conflicts that may have developed amongst these groups prior to this were supposed to be squashed and were supposed to be dead issues, period. The ABs weren't front runners in establishing this agreement. However, they agreed to it nonetheless and gave their word that they were on board with it. But this was deceptive no matter how you cut it. Who knows if they had good intentions when these things were being ironed out in the small corridor? One can only speculate, and that's a question only they can answer. But what I can tell you is this. The ABs knew that Yogi would probably get cut loose out to a GP mainline at some point, just like everyone else. And they had to have discussed what their plans were going to be once this happened. All four of these groups, including the NF, maintain a high priority hit list that identifies targets from their opposition. The targets that have been placed at the top of their list. For example, the MA at one point had Skip at the top of their list. So I'm sure they all discussed contingencies and scenarios about what they were going to do once encountering these individuals out there. To either stand down and respect the agreement or to move on these targets and risk compromising the agreement. I'm sure the ABs discussed Yogi, as it was known across the board that he was a huge target for the AB. In your question, you indicated that there must be some truth to Powder's claims based on the fact that there was no ensuing riot. I don't know where you got that from, but there was in fact a riot at Folsom when they hit Yogi that involved the whites, the blacks, and the Sureños. Besides Yogi's death, 5 other inmates were stabbed that day, so the blacks did make an attempt to come to his aid. I personally don't believe that the blacks knew that he was going to be moved on that day, and that they just allowed it to happen. This would have been a blatant act of cowardice, and it's just not something I believe they would agree to. They definitely knew that there was friction and that the AB considered Yogi a high-profile BGF member, but I just don't think they agreed to let him be victimized by the AB. As I'm sure you know, Yogi was an integral part of the Soledad Six. Hugo Pinell, Johnny Spain, Fleta Drumgo, Willie Tate, David Johnson, and Luis Talamantes that participated in an escaped attempt that was led by George Jackson. He was also a part of the BGF's leadership circle. The AB didn't care about the COs that were killed by Yogi and the others that day in San Quentin's Adjustment Center. But what they did care about were the other 2 white inmates that were killed. They were killed simply because they were white, and this is what the AB focused on. To finish this up, I don't know how true this is, but rumors had also circulated that the ABs were upset with Yogi because he was cell soldiering in ADSEG and was said to have disrespected several high-ranking AB leaders. Again, I don't know how true that is, but this was something else that people were saying. The day he was hit, the Sureños not only assisted the AB by creating a diversion on the yard, but they also mounted a scrimmage and stopped anyone from coming to Yogi's aid. What I never understood about this whole fiasco is why there was never any swift retaliation following this incident and why his death was never avenged. Yogi was one of the BGF's pillars, a catalyst to their revolutionary movement, and yet that call was never answered. A feeble attempt at justifying this was made later. When talks resumed between the AB and the BGF, both groups squashed it under the fraudulent notion that it was a personal issue, that the perpetrators were no longer on the yard, and that this wouldn't be allowed to take place again. I think that that's a bunch of BS, because the problem I have with it being written off as a personal issue is this. When Yogi was killed, it was done by two AB sympathizers. One held him down while the other stabbed him to death. A personal issue is an issue handled between two people, period. But when others render assistance, and it is also coordinated by two collective groups together in unison, that completely negates any claims of it being personal. To me, that's just justification that was used not to answer the call, and of course to avoid going to war like they should have done. So Valley Shark wants to know, when Lynch got removed, did he get hit, or did he see it coming and lock it up before he got hit? Come on, man, what do you think? No, Lynch was a coward. He seen it coming, so he just locked it up. I knew that's what he was gonna do, and that's exactly what he did. Another one of them cats that bumped their gums about me and my situation, but as soon as they got a taste of some of that same adversity themselves, they checked out and didn't even try to show their face. Lynch was a coward, and he's always been a coward. I knew this from running with him on the streets. Every time something kicked off and I wanted to either fight or beat someone up, he wanted to play peacemaker and tried telling me it wasn't necessary. Like that old adage says, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So Big Block wants to know, why wasn't an SF regiment established? In your book, you were in San Jose, Sonoma, and Salinas. Why didn't you guys ever focus on establishing a stronghold in SF? If you read my book, then I'm sure you recall that the first time I functioned in a regiment was in San Francisco. I paroled from Pelican Bay in 1992, between 1992 and 1993, and was appointed to assume the responsibility of the regimental commander. This was after paroling the first time in mid-1992, following the incident with Duck, and right after meeting the then RC Eddie Little Rocha Roche and his second in command, Willie Dreamer Fernandez. After going back on a violation, both Little Roach and Dreamer got swooped up and charged with the double homicide on Federico Arevalo and Barry San Jose. So I was given the honors of going back out to the city and reestablishing the existing regiment. But to be honest, my schooling on street activities and how to effectively operate a regiment from a regimental commander's perspective was meager at best. I had very little clash on street regiments and how they function, so I technically don't even consider this a period in time when I was righteously functioning on the streets. However, my point is, San Francisco was established at one time and was considered one of our strongholds. When I got back out between 1993 and 1994, this was the first time I was appointed as an RC, as an NF member, and San Francisco was still considered a stronghold. I networked with Baki from Salinas and also worked with MC. Honestly, San Francisco is just hit and miss. It just comes down to who's out, who's doing what, and who's focusing on that area. If I wouldn't have got bounced around and redirected by NF leadership to go oversee other regiments like Sonoma, Alameda, Monterey, or Santa Clara, I would have continued to build and establish the city. Besides myself, the only other two C's that were out there were Jesus Chuy Guerrero and Bismarck Nicoya Ocampo. And these guys really didn't have that much street experience. Chuy was a little more polished than Nicoya, and he held it down sometime between 2000 and 2003. But other than that, there was really nobody out there. You would think that a lot more homies from SF would become NF members, but in all actuality, there's just not that many homeboys from the city that get involved like that. I think that that's a direct result of having a different mentality that sort of perceives prison gangs like the NF and the NR as interlopers, guys that put prison and prison politics before the neighborhood. But you're not the only one that's asked that question. I've been asked that many times before. Another element of this, or another factor that has a direct effect of this, is also the NF's lack of vision or leadership's lack of continuing to break ground in the city. San Francisco is a money pit if you play your cards right. There's a thriving market out there that's wide open and lucrative insofar as the type of money-making ventures that the NF has always been pursuing in cities like San Jose, Salinas, Sacramento, Santa Rosa, etc., etc. So California W wants to know, what happens when you hit old age and you're a northerner? NF or Nuestra Raza? Does the system ship you out to a place for really old inmates, or do you stay with your people considering that you're still active? No, CDCR does not accommodate you like that. Not simply based on the fact that you're an older guy. You stay with your people until the wheels fall off. Not on your wheelchair either, just the wheels. Now, the only exception is if you have medical issues or if you require some type of medical treatment that a normal facility can't provide. They'll send you to a medical facility like Vacaville. But this isn't dependent on your age, it's dependent on your medical needs. Example, if you're in need of a wheelchair or you need some type of medical treatment that requires around-the-clock care, they'll send you to Vacaville. Some of the cells over there are wheelchair accessible, and that prison is built to accommodate those types of inmates. So Maciel Rain wants to know, if you could talk to your mom, your grandma, and Vicky, what would you say knowing it was your last time talking to them? I would tell all three of them that my only regret in all this is that none of them got to see me come home and make that transition. The transition that nobody thought was possible. I would tell all of them that even though I was devastated after having to endure their losses, that it made me stronger and that it helped me define some of the more important things in life. Like my freedom, how short and how precious life really is, and most importantly, I'd acknowledge some of the mistakes I made by turning on them and by putting them second to a criminal organization that gave me nothing positive to show for it. So Cesar Castellanos wants to know, what's the craziest thing you had a CO do for you? Bring in deadly contraband. I had a CO bring in a handcuff key and a buck knife one time. I had this guy so compromised that I could have had him bring me in whatever I wanted. I also had him bring me in a whole bottle of Vicodins that he had at home in his bathroom cabinet. That's pretty much the craziest thing I had a CO do for me. Bring in different types of contraband. And this was with different COs over the years. I've had relationships with female COs as well. Trust me, I was doing things with female officers that most guys only fantasize about. So Hugo Yanez wants to know, what happened with BIGBANKTAKESLILBANK from Redwood City, Jesse Morales, after he caught a new case in the U.S. for coming back from his immigration situation, all just to report to the NF? What happened after he got booked in on new charges? Is he in good standings? I don't believe I know BIGBANKTAKESLILBANK from Redwood City by that name. The only BIGBANKTAKESLILBANK I knew is one by the name of Arturo Torres, unless he was going by another name. I was with him in Pelican Bay Shoot sometime between 1997 and 1998. The one I know was an NF member, but he was also getting deported, so I'm wondering if maybe you just got his name wrong. As far as his standings, I can't be sure if he's still active or if he fell off since the last time I was with him. So Santino Lopez wants to know, what's your view on the whole TIBBS situation? Do you think he is going to start a new faction? I've been knowing TIBBS for almost 24 years now, and I just don't think it's his style to try to create a new faction or his own faction. TIBBS is another one of them old school type of guys who wholeheartedly believes in the NF and genuinely cares about the organization in its direction. For that reason alone, I don't think he'd attempt to create another faction because he knows that it would only result in bringing harm to other C's and the organization as a whole. He'd look at that as a selfish move. The others have obviously written him off already, and I doubt anything's going to change that. But to create another faction would almost be commensurate to waging a civil war against the O. As far as what I personally think about TIBBS' situation, let me just say this. Considering he was hit for the reasons that I know about, and considering that there wasn't more involved that I'm aware of, I think it's more of the same. It's bullshit. This tyrannical, repressive, fascistic way of doing business is bad leadership. This arbitrary way of exercising iron-fisted, unjust treatment on C's who in some cases have given over 30 and 40 years of loyal service is the most egregious form of abuse conceivable. Real talk, man. I understand that sometimes examples need to be made, even amongst some of the highest offices or positions within the O. But more prudence and more regard must be given when you're talking about a fellow C's status in his career. Expendability and disposing good, loyal, dedicated C's has become too commonplace. Is this how you treat your brothers? Is this how you want to be treated when your name is on the chopping block? Politics have become way too cutthroat, and I just think that the spirit of carnalismo is dying, it's dwindling, and nobody seems to care anymore. I highly doubt that anyone can truly say in good faith that TIBBS was beyond salvaging and that there was a better way of dealing with his misconduct, if that's what you even want to call it. So Zab Zuda wants to know, besides the two previous NF and MA wars, was there a time you remember where the organization almost got into a third war? I'm confused by this question. It's posed as if you seem to think that the NF and the MA had two past incidents that almost led to a war. If I'm understanding your question right, you're now asking if there was ever a third incident that almost led to a third war. Maybe you can clarify your question, because as far as I know, prior to this end to hostilities agreement, this war has been going non-stop since the 1960s. What two incidents were you referring to? And were you referring to the state or federal branch of the NF? That probably makes a difference. So the Martin 9400 wants to know, in Alameda County Jail, the Norteños and Paisas run together in conflicts versus blacks, others, and Woods. Is it like this in other counties? Since when? Also, what should the punishment be if it is discovered that a homie is trying to run with Paisas in the pen? I've seen this happen twice. Once the homies recognized this guy, the second time dude was found out by the Paisas, but they kept it under wraps. Third question, why do you believe dropouts are a higher priority in Southern California than in Northern California? Last question, what is the equivalent of an M. Carnal? Cat 2 or Cat 3? Even though the alliance between the blacks and the Norteños isn't as strong as it used to be, they still function as if somewhat of a loose alliance continues to exist. The Santa Rita County Jail is one of the few counties where Paisas or Mexican nationals band together with the Norteños. The only other county jail that I'm aware of where Paisas run with the Norteños is Mendocino County Jail, and that's only because I've been there. I'm sure there's probably others as well, I'm just not aware of them. As far as Santa Rita, I've been there myself, so I know from observation and experience that the Paisas and the Norteños band together because they're minorities, and because a lot of the time there's other groups there that tend to thrive on the mass majority, biggest bully on the block mentality. It is what it is, man. And this just comes from a lack of education. This is what actually encourages them to band together. As far as what the sufficient punishment should be for a homie who gets caught trying to run with the Paisas, in my opinion, it all depends on one thing. It all depends on whether or not he's a first timer or if he's just some cat with an identity crisis. If he's a first timer with an identity crisis, then I think he just needs a good tongue lashing and a warning to fall in line or suffer the consequences. However, if he's someone who's programmed before and is fully aware of the possible ramifications, then he might end up suffering the consequences as he knows better. I still give him the benefit of the doubt by ascertaining why he tried to do that, but this could actually be construed as an act of cowardice. As far as your next two questions, I'm at a loss for an answer. Where do you get that dropouts are more of a high priority in Southern California opposed to Northern California? I don't know that this is true. Dropouts are the NF's #1 enemy over anyone else that it considers to be their enemy. These individuals are labeled as traitors, deserters, and the lowest form of trash in the eyes of the NF and their following. Even law enforcement, the MA and the AB, the NF doesn't place anyone before dropouts when it comes to prioritizing their enemies. And again, this last question seems out of context. The equivalent of an M. Carnal is an NF Carnal, period. The category system or the ranking structure has nothing to do with it. They're both members of their organizations respectively. Again, the Martin 9400, man, you famous today, boy, wants to know, I've heard you detail how Raza and the Woods conduct themselves in the shoe. As an Oakland native, I'm curious, how do the Kumi conduct themselves? Any hygiene complaints? Hey, you threw me with that one, man. Respect issues, or do they leave that nonsense in Santa Rita and San Quentin? The Africanos Kumi included, conduct themselves the same way any of the other group segments do in the SHU. They carry themselves with respect, they understand tier etiquette, they understand the importance of PR, public relations, and they maintain their hygiene just like everyone else. The Africanos are no different, but sometimes you get an occasional youngster that's lacking in his education and discipline, who doesn't know how to program back there and who just needs to be pulled up. But again, that's across the board. Ethnicity plays no role in this. These occasional youngsters that come back there who are blind to the ways of the SHU have been white, black, Rasa, and others. So Chitoismo, however you fucking say that, I'm just gonna say Chit wants to know, did you ever meet Renee Boxer Enriquez in your time in prison? What was your thoughts on him, and do you think he's fit for parole? I heard he's been trying to get out. And do you think he was a hitter, and was he really at the top of the food chain for the MA? As far as whether or not I ever met Renee Boxer Enriquez during my time in Pelican Bay SHU, no, I never ran into him. I never personally interacted with him, nor was I ever in a pod with him. The only time I was anywhere close to him was when we were in C facility in the same block together. He was in a different pod, and I knew he was there, but that was the extent of it. You asked what were my thoughts on him. I really didn't have any thoughts on him other than just knowing who he was and his affiliation with the MA. At the time, I was active, so as I'm sure MA members also keep tabs on us and make a normal practice of knowing where all the NF members are housed, I just made a mental note of who he was and where he was at. You asked if I thought he was fit for parole. I'm thoroughly biased in that area. I think every inmate in prison is fit for parole with the exception of chomos and baby killers. Regardless of what he did, how many bodies he laid down, or what people think about him, I think he's done everything he can possibly do to prove that he has completely removed himself from that lifestyle. Even by society's standards, considering everything he's done in order to give himself a second chance, I think he's done more than what was expected of him, and I believe he's earned at least that much. If they can parole Sammy the Bull, then they can pretty much justify paroling just about anybody. And your last question about whether or not I think he was a hitter and if I think he was at the top of the MS food chain, it's a proven fact that he was part of their leader. It's a proven fact that he was part of their leadership. Other former MA members have validated this and have confirmed it themselves. So from everything I know and from what I've heard and seen, yes, I do believe that he was at the top of their food chain. As far as him being a hitter, within that lifestyle, killing alone doesn't always earn you the title of being a hitter. Anyone can pick up a gun and shoot you, and just about every human being is capable of committing murder. But just from looking at some of the things that Boxer's personally done and what he was involved in, I think he was definitely a hitter. So JR wants to know, who is Sandman? Where did he come from? And what is he to you? Where did he come from? What do you mean, where did he come from? I don't know where he came from. He dropped out of the sky and landed inside a YouTube cipher. Nah, I'm kidding, man. It just sounds a little funny when you ask where did he come from. I met Sandman on YouTube, believe it or not, in the comment section. He shot me a message basically telling me that he was computer savvy in certain areas and that if I ever needed assistance to hit him up. Coincidentally, it just so happened to be that I was looking for someone who knew how to create and edit videos. So I got back at him and the rest is history. I had just parted ways with Loaded News Media, who also handled all my recording, editing, and audio issues, so the timing was perfect. So that's basically how we met. As far as who he is to me, well, we're not related, as I'm sure you can see, we look nothing alike. But over time, he's become a close friend and someone who's definitely helped me build the channel. On that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this Q&A. As I've said so many times before, I'll continue doing these Q&As as long as you guys continue to keep submitting the questions. And for those of you that don't know where to submit your questions, leave them in the comment sections of any video. We'll find them. On behalf of Paradigm Media News, I just want to thank those of you who continue. On behalf of Paradigm Media News, I just want to thank those of you who have continued to support the channel and for helping us grow. It's appreciated more than you guys know, and we're trying to not only continue expanding this channel, but our other new channel as well. If you guys could help us out by going over to Paradigm Entertainment Productions and subbing to that channel, I'd really appreciate it. We're working on putting together a podcast, memberships, more member profiles, recorded phone calls, and other good things, but we need to get that channel up and running first. Also on a personal note, I also appreciate all the support you guys have been giving me on the upcoming fight. The positivity and encouragement that a lot of you continue to give is what keeps me focused and motivated.